So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak with all of you about some work, particularly in the last 4 years since I've been working with my current organization, the International Bird Conservation Partnership, or IBCP for short, since it's a very long name. But I can just start by saying I first set foot in West Africa about 25 years ago when I was on my way to serve in the US Peace Corps in Gabon. And after that, I went to Togo, and there was just something, I guess in French you would say, je ne sais quoi. Il y a quelque chose de très spécial en Afrique de l'Ouest, à mon avis. So I am American. I grew up in the USA, and that started kind of a long-term interest and many long-term friendships in West Africa, and that's what's kept me coming back to West Africa. It just has such amazing people, amazing landscapes and wildlife, and also some incredible challenges, as we'll talk about in this presentation. But what gives me great confidence is the fact that there are so many amazing people to meet these challenges, and I think more and more interest in birds. And so, bon, je, je suis américaine, mais j'ai commencé à apprendre français quand j'étais à l'école, parce que les ancêtres de mon père étaient les Français. Donc, je vais parler un peu en français pendant la présentation, mais au fin, je vais faire un petit sommaire en français et je vous encourage, si vous avez des questions, et c'est plus facile à les poser en français, il faut faire ça. Mais, donc, merci bien pour ça. So I'll make some small commentaries in French as we go, but obviously mainly focus on English and have a short summary in French at the end. So I just wanted to start just by showing these wonderful birds, and also some of the people that I'm very lucky to work with, Samuel Abwache Yedom, Lynn Hermé, Minka Graba, Kabumba in Togo, and together here in Togo when Samuel visited earlier this year, and then some people in northern Togo with whom we've been discussing and developing a conservation project. So those are some of the points that we'll come to in this presentation. But I wanted to start just by mentioning Andre Bota, because he was presenting just about a month ago, as I recall, in Friday for Birds. And this is just about the power, I think, of connection and conversation, just like we're having now through your group. Because I was at a conference in Colorado in the USA, and he came and conducted a symposium about African vultures. And until that time, this was in 2019, I just didn't really realize how endangered they were in Africa. And it came out during the symposium that they didn't have a lot of data for West Africa. And so I thought, well, we have some contacts there, we have some potential there. So let's go see if we can make a contribution to meeting this challenge. And so the project that I want to tell you about first concerns that area. So this subject is the conservation status and prospects of critically endangered vultures in Ghana and Togo. This project was highly collaborative. I have some photos of our collaborators a little further in the presentation. And we focused on 3 critically endangered species: the hooded vulture, the white-backed vulture, and the white-headed vulture that are shown here. And although I didn't know until 2019 how endangered African vultures were, I had already heard about raptor declines in general in West Africa. I had done a postdoc from 2008 to 2010 in Ghana with the Zoological Society of London, and read a paper that had just come out by Jean-Marc Thiollet, who has done some amazing work around the world and unfortunately recently passed away, But he highlighted from his own surveys over multiple decades how raptor populations had crashed in West Africa, especially outside of protected areas. And so this showed how important the protected areas are, while also showing that there was no specific reason identified, but that population growth and some of the related changes to land might have something to do with it. And so Nat Anorba, a collaborator from Ghana, brought this paper to my attention, a recent paper just looking at accelerated land cover change in West Africa over the past 4 decades. And the authors point out that the population growth in Africa, it's quintupled since 1950. And the growth is much higher than the world average. And also because the societies in West Africa are largely agricultural with a lot of hunting and gathering, as opposed to kind of industrial societies, as we've seen emerging in China and India and other countries, there's inevitable consequences for land use change. And so they found that the amount of natural land has diminished greatly in recent decades. And so we see the consequences for wildlife. This is another recent paper about mammal declines in Africa in general inside of protected areas. So it shows something of the limits of protected areas. And they highlight almost 60% decline in mammal abundance in Africa inside protected areas between 1970 and 2005, and point out that West Africa has the most severe declines. And this was an article from The Guardian on the right showing a lion. And I thought I would just do a screenshot of that because when I was in Ghana in between 2008 and 2010 doing research on birds, they were talking about that possibly the last lion was killed in Mole National Park in Ghana. And that's the site of our study that I'll be talking about now on vultures. This is just a West Africa map to show you the general area of Mole National Park. It's a little less than half the size of Comoé National Park in the north of the Ivory Coast, but it's still one of the largest savanna protected areas in the region. And it's the last stronghold of some of Ghana's elephants and many of its vultures. So I just wanted to highlight before going on that this work was highly collaborative. It took place over 3 years between 2020 and 2022. And we had participants from, I think, six different countries: Ghana, Togo, Spain, France, Poland, Germany, and me from the USA, although I now live in Sweden. So it was a lot of fun. It's a beautiful place, as anyone who's been in West Africa or been in this area knows. And so all of these people contributed to making the study that I'm describing. And our objectives were very simple. We simply wanted to assess the abundance and breeding activity of critically endangered hooded vultures, white-backed vultures, and white-headed vultures in Mole National Park, and to use our findings to offer conservation recommendations. And I wanted to show this. This is a figure from the PhD thesis of Cole Burton. He's a Canadian scientist who did his PhD on mammals in Mole National Park. And part of it, he used camera trap detections of mammals, and he also used ranger patrol data. And this map just shows where the mammals are concentrated. You can see it's in the southern part of the park. And the reason for that appears to be in part because all of the infrastructure, the ranger station, the headquarters are all in the southern part of the park. And so that's what offers the most protection to wildlife. Going into the north, unfortunately, well, first of all, it was beyond our capability because the roads have not been maintained for decades in Mole, so it's impossible to travel inside the park from the south to the north. But also, it's known from studies like Cole Burton's that most of the wildlife is also concentrated in the south because that's where the rangers are. And it's another indication of how important active protection is for wildlife in Africa and West Africa in particular, how important rangers are, how important these parks are, and anti-poaching patrols. So we conducted 760 kilometers of surveys over 31 days during this 3-year period. This included walking transects and driving transects, where we were just looking for vultures, counting vultures, identifying vultures, and photographing vultures whenever possible. And so the results over this period of time are that we estimated there are about 14 to 18 breeding pairs of hooded vultures. We identified 6 occupied nests in the dry season, that's the European winter. By occupied nests, we mean a nest where a bird was active, such as this hooded vulture nest in a Braceras palm. All of the nests that we found were in the same species of palm tree. It's also called the African fan palm. We found a population of between 12 and 36 pairs of white-backed vultures, and we found 10 occupied nests in the same palm trees. The hooded vulture nests were concentrated closer to roads, and these were concentrated closer to rivers. So this was exciting to see that the birds are reproducing successfully, as far as we can tell, inside the park. And these nests were the first that had ever been identified in Ghana. White-headed vultures are much more rare. They are thought to survive only inside protected areas in West Africa and indeed much of Africa. And we estimate there are perhaps 1 to 2 pairs in Mole National Park. And one of the park rangers indicated 1 occupied nest in 2022 when we were there, and said that a different nest had been used in previous years. I don't have a photo of that nest, but this is a photo taken by Andre Bota of a white-headed vulture nest, just to show you what it looks like. These birds typically have 1 chick only, and the chick typically stays with the parents for a significant period of the first year of its life. So there's a huge investment by these birds for reproduction. And when they can't, when this process is undermined, obviously the population doesn't have a future. So it's very exciting that even though it's a small number of nests, that these nests do exist in Ghana, and hopefully will be protected to give these birds a future in that region. I'm excited to report that we just submitted a publication, or this paper is coming out in print next month in the Journal of Raptor Research, and it's already available online. So there are many more details about what we found online, and including sightings of other globally threatened raptors. These include the endangered martial eagle, which previously was known to nest in Mole National Park. Unfortunately, there is no longer a known active nest, and it's another reminder of how precarious the situation of many globally threatened species is. They're holding on by a thread in many cases, and anything we can do to help them makes an enormous difference. The situation for battlers, I don't know if you can see the photo here, is a little better. We counted about 90 individuals, and we believe that they're breeding in the park, although we didn't find nests because we saw many immature individuals. We are continuing work on vultures in Ghana through Samuel Boakye Yeadom, shown here at a landfill, where he's counting hooded vultures as a part of his master's thesis at the University of Ghana under the direction of Lars Holbæk, who's a professor there, originally from Denmark. And so Samuel has been working for the past year and a half, and is continuing working this year, interviewing people at slaughterhouses and counting vultures in 4 urban areas of Ghana, and collecting a lot of really important information about these birds. And we're really looking forward to learning from his results. We're also conducting similar research in the neighboring country of Togo on hooded vulture numbers at slaughterhouses. This work is being led by Yendubam Korjuak, shown here, and Lynn Erme Mikagraba Kabumba, who's shown here, together with 2 of our collaborators on another project that I'll be mentioning a little bit later. So basically, there are 5 urban centers in Togo that we've been monitoring since 2021, going approximately monthly to count vultures, hooded vultures only. White-backed vultures have last been seen in Togo. There was a single individual seen in 2019. We do not know if they are still nesting in in Togo. One of the national parks in the north, it's called Kérin National Park. I'll speak about it in just a moment. It has been virtually destroyed, leaving very little habitat for these birds and little in the way of food resources. And so the only vultures that we know for certain still have populations in Togo are hooded vultures. The populations, the numbers have a downward trajectory, it looks like, at most of the abattoirs where we've been monitoring. But Kara seems to be an exception. That's a city in the north central part of the country where the numbers seem to be either stable or possibly increasing. And so this is something that we're investigating a little further, and we're hoping to submit a manuscript on this next year. I just wanted to mention just a little background. Many of you probably know this. Andre Bota spoke about this. This is a BirdLife International article from 2021 about vulture declines in Africa. They talk about how across Africa, 60% of vulture deaths are considered to be caused by poisoning. But in that they mentioned that in other aspects, 29% of vulture mortalities may be caused by belief-based killings. So these are killings which are also used. It's also called the fetish trade in French-speaking West Africa, especially. So it's the idea that using vulture carcasses or parts like heads in various treatments can protect you from evil. It can help you win the lottery. It can help your children do better at school. Beliefs like that. And so this is considered to account for approximately almost 30% of vulture mortalities across Africa. But we believe this is the main cause of vulture mortality in West Africa because they don't have the big mammal populations where the poisoning takes place, the predator populations, and there's an enormous fetish trade going on. We have a postdoc, Olivier Boissier, who's pictured here, who is working on quantifying the fetish trade in Togo because the fetish market in Togo is said to be one of the biggest in the region. And this is a photo I took of freshly killed hooded vultures. Again, this is a critically endangered species, and they're being prepared for sale here in Togo. Another project that we have going on in Togo is investigating Fazao Malfakassa National Park. So Togo has been very little studied by ornithologists. And in fact, there's only been one paper on the birds of its main and largest national park. This was published in 2018 by Paul Radley and a colleague. He's pictured here. And at that time, they conducted the first intense surveys of the park and reported 199 species. We had surveys conducted, led by Olivier Boissier, again, together with Kabumba and Yendubom here hiding behind his insect repellent between last year and this year. And they've counted 228 species to date, including 21 new species for the park. And these include the great blue turco and the black bee eater pictured here. I wanted to mention, because this is the Swiss Ornithological Institute, the Friday for Birds session, that the reason that Fazao Malfakassa is still somewhat intact, whereas the other two national parks in Togo, the Fosso-Lion and Kérin in the north, have been largely destroyed. It's because this Swiss man, Franz Weber, made a deal with the president of Togo that they signed in 1990 to manage this park for 25 years. He had a concession through his foundation, the Fondation Franz Weber, and they did an amazing job protecting this park from poaching and many other problems, and doing a lot of community work and other conservation activities to protect the park, which still has elephants and a lot of really amazing bird and mammal species. Unfortunately, their contract was not renewed in 2015. And since then, the park has been under the management of the Togolese government, but we're trying to help them raise more awareness of the importance of protecting the park and to bring more resources to the park, because unfortunately the rangers are telling us the poaching levels have increased sharply since the Fondation Franz Weber left the park. The guard salaries have gone down tremendously. There are fewer resources for the guards to use, like vehicles. The road maintenance has not continued. So there are many problems now being faced by the park rangers and the park manager trying to protect this park that that they did not have to face in the past. So our hope is that our work can help raise awareness of the need to continue to protect this park. And I just wanted to include this last slide regarding protected areas in Togo. In the north of Togo, I mentioned Kerin, or it's also called Oti Kerin National Park in the north. And unfortunately, when you go there, this is a video that I just put up. Kabumba, our collaborator, one of our collaborators in Togo, showed me this. It's produced by the Togolese government. L'agonie silencieuse du parc Oti Kerin au Togo, the silent agony of the park of Oti Kerin in Togo. And basically, when you go there, you just see massive tree cutting for charcoal production. There was a mass slaughter of animals back in the 90s, and the wildlife populations have not recovered, and there's agricultural expansion into these lands, unfortunately, because there's not sufficient support and political will to protect the park. So it makes the work that's done in Fazao all the more important to protect the one park that remains intact. And there's suggestion on the part of these Togolese researchers that this park could be restored. And so my hope is that we may see that in the future. And there's one other project I wanted to mention in northern Togo. This is bird distributions, forest health, and geographic information systems in sacred forest of northern Togo. This is work that's being led again by Kabumba and Yindubam, as you can see here. Zabigu, another one of our IBCP team members in Togo, as well as Brendan Fanta, who's a graduate student at Emporia State University in the US. Together with Komlan Afia-Damanyo, who's here at the university, a professor at the University of Lomé in Togo. And basically, the project is to assist in the protection of a sacred forest in the department of Ton in the region of Tami. And this is near where I lived as a Peace Corps volunteer and where Brandon lived as a Peace Corps volunteer. There has been large project conducted in the past by the UN Development Program to protect this forest, but the forest, even though it was traditionally protected for reasons of sacred status in the traditional religion, traditional religious practices, a lot of the forest has still been cut down simply because people have run out of trees, and wood is the main source of cooking fuel. And so what we're doing is working first of all with the leadership, which is shown here in a recent meeting, working with local women to get them using natural gas for cooking rather than wood, and also working with local women to plant trees to try to restore some of the forest that's been cut and protect some of the forest that's remaining. And the idea is to count do regular bird counts that would start next year in response to some of these recovery efforts. So that's some of our future plans for this area. And with that, I wanted to segue to some work in Benin with Abiola Shafra. It's a project, we're working on a number of projects with Abiola Shafra. He's pictured here. He's a Beninois researcher who we were connected with a couple of years ago through Françoise Dowsett. Many of you may know them, her and her husband, Bob Dowsett. They're phenomenal African ornithologists, or ornithologists in the African continent, who connected us. And so he did some work on raptor distributions in southern wetlands. So in abundance distribution and conservation status of diurnal raptors at southern wetlands of Benin is what we've called this project. And the area here are Ramsar wetlands. And if you're not familiar with Ramsar, it's an intergovernmental treaty for conservation and wise use of wetlands. 90% of UN members, including Benin, participate in this convention. And the entirety of southern Benin has been designated as Ramsar, as two Ramsar sites, the Lac Aime complex here on the in the west, and the Baweme complex here on the eastern side of Benin. And you can see there are three important bird areas in the same region, but there is no bird life partner in Benin, and a lot of baseline data is lacking. And so this is one of the things that that Abiola, sorry, here he is again, is working to address. And so the threats to birds in these wetlands include the fetish trade, which I've already mentioned, where the raptors are used, especially they're wanted for their heads. They're captured and kept live for sale, like this critically endangered hooded vulture shown here. Also, mass numbers of water birds like rails are trapped and sold as food. These are all photos by Abiola. And raptors are of particular concern in this context because they command some of the highest prices in the fetish trade, as I've mentioned already. So these again these are some really pictures that make me very sad of live vultures being offered for sale in these markets. They're not they're intended to be used in ceremonies where they will be sacrificed. So it's a major commercial practice now in the region because of global markets. So it's one reason why, although in the past I would have thought traditional medicine was an appropriate word, it's so far from traditional at this point that I agree with the use the term belief-based uses for these practices now. So the objectives and methods, and in this next study that I'll tell you about, are were just to conduct the first inventory of diurnal raptors on rivers and wetlands in southern Benin, and to evaluate species abundance, distribution, and threats at these two wetland areas that I've already mentioned. And Abiola conducted these surveys during the European winter, and which is the dry season in Benin, between December and March of this past, of earlier this year. And he conducted these surveys by canoe, stopping for up to 30 minutes to identify, count, and mark birds on the GPS, visiting each route twice. So he counted 1,874 total individuals of raptors and 17 species. 65% were African residents, so about 2/3, and just over 1/3 were European migrants and one inter-African migrant that I'll talk about shortly. One of the European visitors was the osprey, shown here. And I wanted to highlight on this slide some of the other migratory species that were visiting: the peregrine falcon, the lanner falcon, the marsh harrier, the black kite. And this is this was the most abundant bird in the survey because it's a breeding visitor, the yellow-billed kite that comes to southern Benin to nest during the dry season from northern Benin and areas further north. So osprey were present at 80% of the sites surveyed. This is a photo by Abiola in Benin, and I just wanted to put it together with a photo from here where I live in Sweden, because in theory this could be the same bird. Swedish breeding ospreys travel about 7,000 kilometers on average to winter in West Africa, and it's just amazing. It's one of the things, I'll come back to this later at the end of the talk, but the migration between Europe and Africa just boggles the mind. We know so little about it, and I think it's a really exciting area for future research. So we'll come back to that at the end of this presentation. One of the African resident species counted was the black-shouldered kite. So there were 17 individuals, and you can see the map of where they were concentrated, fairly widely distributed here. Another African resident is the lizard buzzard, which many of you who've worked in this region may be familiar with. And it's not so much concentrated on wetlands, but also in wetlands. So there were 44 individuals of this species. And the yellow-billed kites, 1,600 individuals were counted, so they were by far the most abundant bird in the survey. And what's notable, there were many nests. I think 90 nests total that were counted. Most of these were concentrated in sacred forests. So we mentioned in Togo already, we're working in a sacred forest. These are areas that traditionally are not touched. They are traditionally protected. There are special taboos about hunting there. And for that reason, there are still many large trees, whereas others have been cut down. And this offers a really crucial refuge for these birds to nest and rest and be protected from hunting. So one of the nests is shown here. Abiola identified intensely persecuted species, including both the yellow-billed kite and the osprey, and also the other 3 species shown here, the shikra, dark-chanting goshawk, and the African goshawk. Many of these are captured using baited steel jaw traps or fish hooks in shallow water. So this is illegal, but there's virtually no enforcement. And they are hunted, especially during this time of year, the northern winter or the dry season, because the water levels are low enough that it's accessible, much more accessible to people than it is when it's flooded. They're only hunted during the dry seasons, as I mentioned, but the markets for these species operate year-round. So this is a map that Abiola made of some of the fetish markets of the region. There are many, and you can see they're surrounding the region and inside the region. So it shows you kind of how pervasive this phenomenon is. This is one of his photos of vultures, and these are some other photos I took at the fetish market that we've already mentioned in Lomé, Togo, which is supposed to be the region's largest, and which is entirely run by traders from Benin, even though it's located in Togo for some historic reason, and because there's such a large market for them in Benin. So it shows this is an example, just a reminder. The gray-crowned crane is extinct in Togo, but you can still find it in the fetish market. So Abiola also recently got a grant from Hawkwatch International, and he's making a map of vulture trafficking to Benin, because in many cases the demand outstrips the local supply. And so he's been conducting research that shows that there's a huge trade that goes throughout the region from places as far as we can see here as the Republic of Congo and Mali going to Benin. And these are subjects of forthcoming and future publications. So we'll have more details on that in the future. And I just wanted to wrap up this segment of the talk by mentioning the plight of kites. So kites are sold at fetish markets for something like between 60 US cents to $1, depending on the season. But they are also modified to resemble vultures. So when I first went to a fetish market in Togo, I thought this was a vulture. I just took one look and assumed it was. But if you look a little more closely, you can see that it matches the profile of the kite. And actually, the trader has just plucked the feathers to make it resemble a vulture, because vultures are sold for so much more money. We know from Samuel Boakye Yedom's work in Ghana, people working at slaughterhouses have told him that they have been approached and offered as much as $900 US equivalent in local currency in Ghana to be able to trap vultures at these slaughterhouses. That's the equivalent of about 40% of a typical Ghanaian's annual income. And it's probably even more valuable in Togo or Benin. So it just shows you the kinds of pressures that these birds are under because of the fetish trade. This is a little more work by Abiola that's ongoing now. He's doing work on heron rookeries in the same wetlands in southern Benin, and working with local populations to to understand how important they are to protect, and also to conduct an inventory of the birds that are present and their nesting activities. So this is just a close-up of a poster that he's made, and some of the results that he's gotten so far. Um, I'm just advancing a little more quickly because of time. And I wanted to highlight something I think just about the most exciting thing I've learned in my conservation work in recent times, which is an idea that Abiola brought to me a few months ago. I think he had it sometime earlier, as he told me. But the idea is that because the sacred areas, sacred sites, sacred forests, sacred islands are, the protection there is taken seriously. Unlike we saw in Mole National Park, a lot of the time, if there isn't a poaching patrol ready and waiting, people will simply enter and break the law. It's very common, as any of us who have worked in these areas will know. However, sacred forests are taken much more seriously. And so he mentioned the idea that perhaps additional forests could be made sacred, therefore protecting the birds. And I had never thought of such a thing. I didn't think that was possible. I always thought that sacred forests were something from time immemorial that had been established before any of us was born. But Abiola worked with some of the fetish priests in this area, and they agreed that they should make more sites sacred. And so this is an example of a ceremony that they recently performed, pictures that he sent me. Some of the ceremony is secret in accordance with their practices. And so part of the ceremonial objects are shielded under this shelter. But basically, they went out to some of these islands and declared them sacred. They made them sacred. They consecrated these areas. And so that is amazing news, in my opinion, because it offers so many benefits to so many birds, nesting herons and other water birds, as well as some of the raptors that we've been talking about. And I just never thought that was possible. And so this is new, this is brand new, and it remains to be seen how far this can go and how much protection this can offer. But I just wanted to mention this as an example of kind of new ideas in conservation. And I think we really need these. Obviously, if conservation worked perfectly the way many of us would wish, we wouldn't need it as much as we do now. But a lot of things have gotten worse despite the best efforts of a lot of people in recent years. And this is an example of kind of a new frontier that I think is really exciting. And so I just wanted to wrap up this section with Abiola's work in Benin by showing some of the community work that he's been doing. Here he is showing his poster in a community, talking with people, making a presentation. This is an interview with one of the fetish traders where he's gotten a lot of great information. So this is really exciting work. He's writing it in French, and this is the first presentation of it in English, so far as I know, but we'll see more of this. And so this is just another kind of collaboration that I'm really excited about, and congratulate Abiola Shafra on his amazing work. Along those lines, I just wanted to mention this is a new project that we've sponsored with Akanleye Isaac Oyegbami. And this is in neighboring Nigeria, in Osogbo. So it's just the same idea of promoting bird conservation and education and bird clubs in the area where he's working. And just that this is a new project for us. We've mainly done research, but it's obviously really important to get the word out that birds are special, beautiful, important, that they have all kinds of values rather than simply as for eating or for the fetish trade. And hopefully his efforts will succeed in getting more young people interested in birds and more people working together with us to protect them and understand them. I also wanted to mention a project that I'm really excited about in Côte d'Ivoire with Professor Saint-Guillaume Odukpe at the University of Félix Houphouët-Boigny. He came to us with an idea to study the yellow-necked Picathardes population in Lamto, where he lives. And So we're just about to get that funded. And I wanted to throw in a picture of him on a visit to Switzerland and Sempach, because it's another example of how the Swiss Ornithological Institute and societies connect with bird conservation in this region. I forgot to mention before, it was the Swiss Ornithological Institute, I believe, that funded the Birds of Ghana book that I use, and that is also the best book for studying birds in Togo. So again, it's recognizing the Swiss for all of their efforts in supporting bird conservation in West Africa. Lastly, as we wrap up, I wanted to mention a couple of other projects that are underway in Cameroon. One is an investigation of the drivers of hornbill hunting in littoral Cameroon, which is shown here in Mont Lonako. It's an important bird area, but it doesn't have an official protected status, and we were alerted to very intense hunting of hornbills in this region by Francis Guetse, who's a PhD student at the University of Bamenda. And so we've just used data that he collected together with Shan Su, who's a postdoc at IBCP, to submit a manuscript on investigating the drivers of this hunting, and specifically whether foreign demand is contributing to it. And we're also really excited that we got some support for this project from the African Bird Club. And lastly, this is a project on hornbills that I did when I was working on a postdoc in Ghana. Over 10 years ago, I did the field work, and then we more recently published the paper. This again is with Lars Holbeck, a professor at the University of Ghana. So I realized I had been in Gabon previously, as mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, and in Gabon, I would see hornbills every day. And when I was in Ghana, I realized that I almost never saw hornbills. And so, but supposedly there were 9 species of forest hornbills in the forest where I was working at that time on understory birds. And so we decided to do surveys using playback to do counts of these 9 hornbill species in Ghana. And we found, because Lars Holbeck had data from the 1990s, and we had data, then we got new data from much more recently, we were able to show really devastating declines, just in the same manner that Jean-Marc Thiollet was able to show for raptors in West Africa. Without baseline data, you can't do this, but in the case of hornbills, we had it, and we could show that. So we're building on this project with a new project on hornbill populations and responses to hunting, now focused also in littoral Cameroon, close to Nolonako forest, which I just mentioned, where Francis Guetse has been working. But this is an Igbo forest where there's some other conservation work, and hopefully a new protected area will be established. And we're doing this with graduate student Colin Jensen, shown here, under the direction of Matthias Waltert at the University of Göttingen in Germany, with Lars Holbeck, and also with Anya Debite Abba, who's at the University of Boué in Cameroon. So they just got started, and I'm really excited about what they're going to find, because it's the same 9 species that we studied in Ghana. 8 of them are present in Cameroon, with one exception, and that's the white-thighed hornbill in Cameroon replaces the brown-cheeked hornbill in Ghana. So I'm really excited about the potential to compare their study, which is ongoing, with the study that we did in the past. And the most exciting thing is that there are a lot more hornbills there, and I hope it stays that way. So this is my final slide. I just wanted to come back to the idea of migration between Europe, especially Western Europe, and Western Africa. So it's believed that most of the birds that nest in Western Europe migrate to winter, most of the migratory birds, I should say, migrate to winter in West Africa, but we know so little about them. And I moved to Sweden a little less than 3 years ago, but before that I was working in Nebraska. And a couple of years ago, I was able to work with the University of Nebraska to establish a MODIS station. So for those who don't know, the MODIS wildlife tracking system, it's a way to automatically detect migrating birds that are wearing a tiny little tag by erecting a small receiving station made of antennas. And it's a relatively inexpensive way to get information about bird migration. And there had been a lot. The system started in Canada. And so there are lots of stations you can see on this map. The yellow dots are all the stations in Canada and the northeastern US, but we realized there were almost no stations in the middle of the USA. So we got one established, and within just the first month, they picked up all these different birds migrating back and forth. And I just thought, again, it's a relatively low cost method. If we can do this in West Africa, then this would be an amazing way to pick up a lot of tagged birds that have already been tagged in Europe. It would be a way to raise more awareness about bird migration in West Africa and build more capacity and interest for bird research in West Africa. So I was really excited to meet Crinian Jarrett, who is a postdoc at the Swiss Ornithological Institute. I took the liberty of throwing in her picture here. And we started talking about this at the last meeting of the European Ornithologists Union in Lund in Sweden just a couple of months ago. So I'm really excited about the potential for doing this possibly in Cote d'Ivoire, where there's a lot of research from the Swiss Ornithological Institute going on. And possibly, I think Aplori in Nigeria would be another fabulous place to do this because there are already so many researchers. And I just wanted to throw that idea out because I just think it would be, if there are more people interested in that idea, it's something I would love to discuss and work to make happen. And so that is my last slide. This is my organizational website. If you want to learn more about a lot of these projects, we have web posts about them there. This is my email if you want to contact me. And now I'll just make a very short summary in French and then be happy to take questions and have a discussion as much as we have time for. Bon, merci, merci beaucoup pour votre attention. J'espère que c'était intéressant. Je ne sais pas combien de gens sont ici qui sont les francophones, mais je vais faire un très petit sommaire des projets que j'ai discutés. Bon, le premier, c'était au Ghana. On a parlé des voitures qui sont menacées d'extinction et on a fait les recherches dans un parc national du Mollet sur combien ils sont et leur nid et on a donné les idées pour les protéger mieux dans l'avenir. Après ça, on a discuté Togo et il y a aussi les vautours. Bon, il n'y a pas 3 espèces au Togo d'après ce que nous savons, mais il y a peut-être une espèce seulement qui reste. Mais on est en train de faire un projet depuis 2021 sur les numéros des 7 espèces de vautours dans les abattoirs dans 5 villes dans le pays. Et on est toujours en train de faire cette recherche et on espère de publier ça l'année prochaine après un peu de plus de collection de données. Après ça, on a parlé d'un projet de recherche au Bénin avec Abiola Chafra. Il a fait les surveys des oiseaux rapaces au sud, à côté de l'eau. Et il a aussi fait les recherches sur les héroniers. C'est un projet très, très intéressant et il a proposé de faire plus des sites sacrés pour protéger les oiseaux. Et on vient de commencer ça et je suis très intéressée de voir si ça peut marcher mieux de ce qu'on fait déjà. Après ça, on a parlé un peu de travail, d'autres projets qu'on fait en Nigeria, par exemple, pour encourager les étudiants d'apprendre plus sur les oiseaux. Et aussi, en Côte d'Ivoire, on va lancer un projet sur les piquetards. C'est un oiseau très spécial en Lamto, en Côte d'Ivoire, avec Saint-Guillaume au Ducpé. Et finalement, on fait quelques projets au Cameroun sur les calaos. Il y a une menace des chasseurs contre les calaos et on est en train d'investiguer ça avec Francis Guetze de l'Université de Bamenda et aussi avec Colin Jensen dans l'Université de Göttingen avec Matthias Waltert et Anya Dabité. On est en train de compter les calaos et de voir comment sont les conséquences de la chasse en forêt Ebo en Cameroun. Donc, je pense que c'est tout pour le petit sommaire. Pardon que c'est très, très court, mais s'il y a les questions en français, je vous encourage à les poser. Et nous avons aussi notre site web où vous pouvez apprendre plus de notre recherche. Merci beaucoup.